Olivia spent her childhood in a small town. Her parents were simple laborers. Her father was geologist, often absent for long periods of time, and her mother taught school. When her father was killed on one of his trips to the northern mines, her mother took it very hard. In time, she realized that she could no longer live in the house where she had been so happy for so many years. She left it to Olivia and moved into one-room apartment. Her daughter by then had received her education and was working as a surgeon in the neighborhood. Every morning, Olivia would take the train from her provincial town to the district hospital, where she worked with pleasure. One such day, on the platform, she saw several beggars surrounding the wheelchair of a disabled guy and trying to steal money, threatening to throw him onto the tracks. Olivia quickly walked over and pulling her phone out of her bag shouted, "Well, leave him alone, or I'll press the police call." The tramps hissed and flattering words at her, but left nonetheless. As they left, they shouted to the wheelchair-bound man, "And you, Pendulous, wait, we'll be back." The girl came closer, picked up the boy's hat from the ground, shook it off, and put it in his lap. Then she held out her hand and, smiling, said, "My name is Olivia. What did they want from you?" The guy hesitated a little, because no one had ever talked to him so easily. From normal, healthy people, much less got acquainted. But, shaking the girl's hand, he replied, "Noah, it often happens here. Whoever is stronger is right. They think that since I can't stand up, they can take everything away from me." That is how their friendship began. At their next meeting, Noah said that he had no family and was an orphan. After graduating from the orphanage, he got a job, entered the institute by the correspondence. He liked studying very much. He was even successful in the profile Olympiads. He had big plans and hopes for a good future. As an orphan, he was given a small but separate apartment. Everything was fine until one day, while working as a climber at the construction site, he fell from a great height. When the boy regained consciousness, there were the white walls of the ward at the district hospital. Later, he learned that he had suffered a serious back injury, and as a consequence, was paralyzed. When the attending physician Noah entered the room, he asked, "Doctor, is there any chance of getting up at least? Or will I lay like a vegetable now?" The traumatologist tried to reassure me. "Believe me, you should and can fight, and there is a chance to fix everything. Nerve endings are not affected." Then he was a little quiet and added, "It is possible to recover, but not with us. There is no good equipment and specialists. This is not even a city, but an ordinary regional hospital. But it is possible to solve the problem in the capital, but even better in Israel or Germany, where an orphan can get such money for trip and treatment. Even if you sell his small apartment, there is not enough money. And then where to live?" After being discharged from the hospital, Noah fell into a deep depression. It seemed to him at the time that life was over, before it had even begun. Who would need such a cripple now? But life, albeit in a wheelchair, continued, and something had to exist on. The guy started going around the train stations and begging. The money he collected was enough not only for simple food, but also for booze. Every night he drank, not to the point of passing out, but it began to happen every day. Then one day he was approached by the criminal guys, who covered the local beggars. "So, buddy, you wanna make some money? You gotta pay your taxes." One of them started the conversation. Noah tried to object. "What money? What are you talking about? Just kopecks at least for food." But before he had finished listening, one of the guys came closer to his face and almost hissed, "So, you're going to cut back on your food, buddy? You'll eat bread without caviar, puree, with clean water from the tap, but you will pay the tax every day, or else." At that moment he did not push the stroller hard, but pushed it toward the edge of the platform. "Oh, and there's no man. The electric car went by," said the one who was pushing, and everyone with a laugh went toward the station. It had been several weeks since Olivia and Noah had first met. The guy met her on the platform every day, and they could, as long as there was time, talk on any topic. One day, Olivia even invited him to visit her. He was shy to accept the invitation for a while, but really wanted to see where his savior lived. Choosing a day, he bought a box of chocolate with the money he had raised and took the train to Olivia's house. Once she opened the door, she did not hide the fact that she was very happy to see Noah. They talked for a long time. The woman fed him with borscht. Already about to leave, the guy saw the kitchen door had no handle. "Is there a handle?" he asked, pointing to the door. "Of course, it fell out, and there's no one to do it," replied Olivia. Noah clarified whether there were any tools and promised next time to be sure to fix it. On his next visit, he fixed the door and at the same time fixed the leaky barrel in the toilet. From that day on, the guy was at Olivia's house a lot, fixing and screwing things up. His hands turned out to be just gold. She, in turn, tried to cook something tasty. She would pamper him with pancakes, bake pies, or take a jar of soup with her. She persuaded Noah to draw up a disability pension. It's not a penny at all. He did everything that was required, and now he received a monthly payment. He cannot beg at the train stations. One day, when Noah was going to see Olivia again, his neighbor called him. "Honey, wait a minute." The woman was in her 60s. "Don't insult our doctor. Her life has already hurt her." Aunt Chloe, the neighbor's name, said that Olivia was married, but very poorly. Her husband had not missed a single skirt since their first day of marriage. He even secretly took her home when Olivia was at work. By the time she got to district, worked and came back, he had time to arrange almost romantic evenings with the girls. He found some young chick and left Olivia at the most inopportune moment. She was having a baby, but she couldn't bear it. Because of this prodigal cat, she lost her child. Wiping away a tear, the neighbor continued. "Well, you take care of her, and do not hurt her, my dear. She is truly a golden person." Noah, listening, said, "What do you mean? Of course. How can you hurt her? She is no longer a stranger to me, but a good friend." He understood that they could not be a couple. She was a wonderful doctor, a wonderful hostess, and a beautiful woman. But what was he? A handicapped man with no lineage and no future? After a while, they became like family, as if they had been in touch for 100 years. He helped with household chores, and she took care of him. On Noah's next visit, Olivia offered to move in with her for good, saying that it would be easier, and there would always be men working in her house. Noah did not resist, and now every day he came in his wheelchair to the train to meet Olivia from work. On one such day, as they were talking, moving toward the house, near the garbage cans, a faint whining could be heard. Olivia pushed aside a box that was lying by the garbage can and picked up a small, squeaking lump. It was a puppy, all dirty, very pathetic, and of unknown breed. So, there were 3 of them in the house. Time passed, and soon, the puppy was unrecognizable. If he was glad when his mistress came home from work and stood on his hind legs, he was almost as tall as her. It was difficult to determine the breed, but something resembling an alibi, still not clear with whom, was seen in Richard, and it should be noted that the dog continued to grow. Richard was faithful and loyal friend. If suddenly someone approached Noah's stroller, or approached Olivia from strangers, he would get into defensive posture and growl menacingly. One night, when the whole village was sound asleep, Olivia heard some rustling in the corridor. She put on her robe and went to see, but was grabbed by someone's hand, right by the throat. An unfamiliar voice asked, "Will you tell me yourself where the gold is? Or can I help you with a knife?" Olivia felt the cold on the blade on her throat. She could have screamed, but she understood that Noah would be unable to help, only make the situation worse. "I work as an ordinary doctor. What gold? Fear God," she said barely audibly. "You don't have any. Daddy did." The stranger continued, "You know what vein of that gold he ran into? You wouldn't dream of it." The second bandit added, "Yeah, he got his hands on it and took it all for himself. That bastard." Olivia tried to explain that her father had been dead for more than 6 years, and she didn't know about any gold. But the bandits were not going to live without their loot. They started to turn over everything in the house. At that moment, the door opened abruptly, and Richard flew into the room. He threw one of the burglars with his entire bulk and pressed him to the floor, growling menacingly. The neighbors, who had heard the cries for help and called the police, were already rushing through the door. The robbers had been taken to the police station. It turned out that Noah had spent the night in the summer house. That night he became somehow uneasy when the dog started barking and ripping out the chain with the roots. Noah got into baby carriage and rolling out into the streets. He saw the light in the house and the flickering shadows of unknown men. They had no secrets with Olivia, and he knew for a fact that she was not expecting visitors, especially at the third hour of the night. Noah immediately rushed to Rich, unhooked him from the leash, and to open the door of the house with his paws was a usual thing for a huge dog. Noah himself directed the stroller to the neighbors and started calling for help. Later at the police station, Olivia learned that the robbers had previously worked with her father, and far from being geologists, as her mother had told her. They were so-called diggers, who worked for private individuals. The purpose of such offices was only to find gold sites for further mining. No, her father was a geologist by education, and used his knowledge and experience to find places where the precious metal could be mined. Private companies, he said, had to set up gold mines which were not always legal. It was 7 years ago, shortly before his death, that her father and these very comrades found gold. But as they say, jewels spoil people, and so this extraction completely drove them mad and took away their minds. The companions began quickly, literally bit by bit, to gather the gold and hide it in a certain place. It was decided to make a hideout in an abandoned gatehouse. When her father unexpectedly died crossing a stormy river, the so-called companions decided to take everything for themselves. The hiding place they knew about was completely empty. The father had cheated before he died, or perhaps he was trying to protect himself and had hidden all the gold they had mined. At that moment, the so-called companions were not too upset, having decided that once a gold mine had been found, it would still yield a profit. But the trouble was there was no more gold in this very spot. The searchers hoped for 7 more years to find more, continuing in other directions. But at last, they found nothing more. Then, they remembered again that they had also had booty, which had disappeared without a trace, and went to the place of residence of a colleague. They considered that he, even if he had brought it home and hidden it, might not have said anything. It is possible that the daughter did not know anything, but they still decided to take a chance. When they found out the address of the former companion, they set out to demand their share from her. But this was not the outcome they had expected. In the summer, when Olivia and Noah decided to renovate the kitchen, they discovered a hiding place behind the stove. Right in the wall was pasted a piece of wallpaper that did not fit the pattern. They joked about how they could calculate that there was literally 50 by 50 centimeters missing. When they ripped it off, they saw a small niche in the wall, where all the gold was. After they gave the treasure to the state, they received a percentage due. This sum was enough to send Noah to an operation, and even to pay his rehabilitation in sanatorium. He returned smiling happily, and got off the train on his own 2 sturdy legs. On the platform, Olivia and the dog were waiting impatiently for him, wagging his tail, in anticipation of his master. The young people happily snuggled up to each other. Now the couple is getting ready for the wedding, and besides, Richard will have a little master, or a mistress, in a little while.